And we are going to start at the very beginning, right? A very good place to start. So our story of faith begins with the story of creation, of creativity. And we might know this story kind of in shorthand form, but if it's been a while since you read the first chapter of Genesis, you might want to go back this afternoon and just read it and remember the detail of all the things that were created and how that happened. So we're just going to read the first day and the sixth day, and trust you to fill in the rest of the days on your own time. But to think about also that quote that we started the morning with, that everything that is created comes from who you are. So what does that say about our world? Right? Thank you, Tyler.
Good morning again. So our reading, like she said, Genesis 1 and 6. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Now let's have our hymn of preparation. "This Is My Father's World," number 144 in the United Methodist Hymnal.
So we have a sermon every Sunday, right? Just have a seat, where I attempt to discover some glimpse of God that we can share with each other from our communal experiences. But there are some times during the week where I'm out and about and I'm meeting folks and we have conversations, and there's so much to be discovered about God in those conversations, and I wish that I could share that with the congregation. And so we're going to do something new this morning, and I just ask for your grace and your forgiveness. Because I'm just going to talk to Alan a little bit, and we have here an expert on creativity, although maybe you don't want to be called that.
Yeah, but setting a high bar there.
Well, I have a master of divinity. That is my degree, so the bar is unreasonably high. But this is the first time either of us have done this, so we're just going to see how it goes and hope that you glimpse something of Creator God in our conversation. So we talked a little bit about this with our kids, but you were talking about what it means to be creative, and I would expect that you hear a lot from people when they find out you're an art teacher. "Oh, I'm not creative," right?
I think the most common response I get is, "I can't draw." And I think the unspoken subtext is, "You can't make me." There's a fear of it, where someone's had that one negative experience, maybe someone said something about their work that, and that can shut you down so quickly. When you're, especially, I teach 5th and 6th grade, when you're at that kind of impressionable age where you're becoming more socially aware, it only takes one or two negative experiences to make you realize that you want to take that creative side of yourself and put it away, because it makes you stand out from the crowd. And, young people especially are very, very intent on blending into the crowd as much as possible. So yeah, I do hear that a lot. I think about it a lot too as an adult, because I make a lot of different stuff. I like making stuff, and the most common thing I hear when someone sees something that I've made that they like is, "Wow, you could sell that." And I say, "Well, no, I made it for myself. I already have a job. I don't need another job. I make this for my own enjoyment because it enriches my quality of life." And that's something that I think we also lose track of. It can be much more about just improving our quality of life and improving our community. Enriching the lives of our family and friends, not just, a lot of definitions of creativity are focused on, could you patent it, Like, can you put a patent on it and sell it? And if that's the case, then it's creative, but there's a lot more to creativity than that.
What, could you define creativity or,
probably
or
not.
talk about it? Like, what does it mean to be creative?
Yeah, I take a very broad definition, and there's people much smarter than me who disagree with me on it. But, Howard Gardner is someone who I've read a lot of his research. He's at Harvard and came up with a theory of multiple intelligences, and his theory had to do with creativity being, I'm going to mess it up, making something unique that's accepted by your community. And I think even that's very restrictive. To me, it's just engaging in productive work, not just going out and being a consumer, but being a creator, producing something. Whether it's something that's unique or not, to me, is not as important. I think a lot of us have lost track of the fact that we learn things by imitating others, by pretending. Little kids do that. They follow us around and imitate us as adults and act like us in order to learn how to be adults. And you can specialize that a lot more. And in my class, kids come in and they act out how to be an artist. It doesn't mean they're going to grow up to be an artist, but they play pretend. And we think that only young kids engage in that imaginative play. But as they get older and more socially aware, they're really acting out what their role in the community could be, right? They're trying on different identities. I've kind of lost track of what the question was at this point, sorry. Usually when I teach a class, it's, I talk for just a couple minutes and as I make them do something. That way I can keep track of what I'm doing.
Well, we were talking about
the definition of creativity.
Yeah,
right?
being creative.
Yeah.
And then you've also mentioned a couple of things that get in the way of creativity, the idea of fear.
Yeah, I think a lot of what gets in the way are most of our obstacles to being creative are internal, I think, in terms of we tend to set very high bars for usually just higher than we can achieve, sometimes much higher, so that we have permission not to do it, right? Give ourselves permission to not try. One thing I talk to my students about a lot, I use a lot of analogies with sports where, they think because they picked up a paintbrush and they started one painting and it didn't come out exactly how they thought, well, I can't do it. I'm not good at this. And it's like picking up a basketball and thinking you're going to go out and try out for the NBA and get picked as a first-round draft pick. And it's like you're not going to play like LeBron James right off the bat. And the majority of us, even if we practice a lot, still aren't going to play like LeBron James. But it doesn't mean you can't go down to the YMCA and play rec league basketball on a Wednesday and enjoy yourself. And that's more the standard that I look for with my students is, can you engage with this and get the basics and get enjoyment from it?
We have that in the church too.
Do you?
I don't know if, but the United Methodist Church has a motto or a mission statement, and it's to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So talk about an unattainable bar. Like if we have not transformed the whole world, then we're not doing our job. It's too high. Who can do that?
It depends how you define it too, though. I mean, transformation can be a very small thing. It doesn't have to be everybody in the world doing,
Right.
It can
But I
be
like
small.
what you said about if you set the bar too high, it's like giving yourself permission to not try because you can't do that. So you have to redefine what the goal is.
But I think with art especially, it's, it puts what you can't do right in front of you, right? It makes you very aware of your limitations, and that can be a really positive thing if you're open to that and it doesn't, hurt your feelings. As I said during the children's sermon, that's why a lot of people make their art in private. They don't do it in a room full of other people because, another thing that I talk with my students about is that they think, just because they have a dog and they love dogs, right? I want to draw my pets, right? And so I have a dog, I love dogs, I see my dog every day, I should know what a dog looks like and be able to draw it. But, really you just can recognize a dog, doesn't mean you know what they actually look like, which is a funny thing. We go through life surrounded by all these things that are really amazing that we haven't ever spent the time to sit down and look at really closely. Mm-hmm. And dogs are really hard to draw, So when you sit down and you try to do it, it makes it suddenly obvious, like, wow, I actually don't know that, It's not necessarily the drawing ability or the skill. Drawing is a very logical process. I think engineers would make really good draftsmen, I'm sure. You can follow some rational steps. It's like learning a language, but taking the time to observe what's around you and pay close attention to it that's harder.
So being an artist helps you be more aware of your world.
Yeah, I think learning to draw is really a lot about learning about perception and understanding how you see things and how your brain processes information. I don't know, not to get too into the weeds about it, but even just like looking at a space like this and how could you draw that on a two-dimensional surface and make it recognizable to someone else? And there's a set of steps you can follow to do that. Yeah. Technique is one thing. Inspiration is something different. Having the desire and the drive to go out and do it. But I think listening to the scripture, a lot of times we set for ourselves that image of like, well, you say, let there be light, and it's good, and I should be able to just sit down and draw a picture, and there it is, and it's good. But it's a lot harder for people.
Yeah, again, that's God.
Right, exactly.
So we're going to be just a couple steps below that.
Right. Well,
Right.
But like we talked about, I think those stories set kind of some of our models for creativity. Right. We tend to think of artists as being that individual working by themselves as opposed to part of the community and engaged with those around them.
So you said artists are part of their community and engaged with those around them. How do you see art or the process of making art part of the community or community experience?
It happens in different ways. For me, it's teaching. It's being in a classroom with kids and getting them excited about doing it and kind of demystifying the process of making art and making it something that's accessible and everyday. I think that's one of my big goals for my class is that they can be in a room full of kids drawing and painting and sculpting, and to them it's not a big deal. That's just what they expect, and so that when they grow up and have kids of their own and take them to school, if there's not an art class, they'll say, well, what's wrong with the school? Why isn't there art going on here? So that's how it works for me. I don't have a huge desire to go and show my work in a gallery or things like that. But we had Garth Edwards who came to town, and he's a public artist. He does installations, and he did the metal birds on Union Ridge. I got to be very involved with helping arrange that, which was really exciting. And up until that point, it was a nice school. It was a new school. It's a modern building, and it's a lovely place to work, but then it got those birds all over it, and suddenly it felt like it was for kids. And it was like, yeah, this is somewhere where you want to bring your 5 or 6-year-old and drop them off, and they're going to feel welcome. It's going to have that sense of wonder about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's
Have
really
you all
important.
seen that? If on your way home from church, just go down to Union Ridge and pull into the driveway. The building B, it was built in 2014 or 15,
Something like that,
so
yeah.
recently. But Alan was really instrumental in finding a grant that would bring art into public places. And so there's these huge aluminum animals all over the outside of that building. And you're absolutely right. When you drop your kids off, it makes you feel like this is a place not just for kids, but for kids to grow and to be who they're going to be, kind of.
Yeah, well, and like the Crayon Factory video, there's a lot behind the scenes. You think these buildings just kind of show up. I got to be on the architecture committee for that building, which was a lot of fun. But the initial design, the drop-off area was the edge of the gym, and there's just a big blank brick wall, 2 stories. And it's like, could you make it look like somewhere you want to take your kindergartner? You're not just sending them into this big brick factory-looking building. So I think the artwork definitely helps with that, too.
Right. That's great. So you said if a kid wants to draw their dog, like kind of going back to that, they don't really know how to draw it. So what do you do when they get to that place? How do you help them know what a dog looks like?
Yeah, well, you show them a dog. So it depends how old they are. You know, I mean, different developmental stages draw and paint in different ways. I mean, our kids who are in kindergarten through 3rd grade will sit down and draw a dog, and they're happy as clams, and they will come and show you their wonderful dog because they don't have that social awareness at that age. In 3rd and 4th grade, it starts to develop, and by 5th and 6th grade, they're very aware of, you know, they're comparing their work with other kids. So with younger kids, you give them paper and you teach them about shapes and color and line and how to put them together, and you know, I mean, it's just different forms of building blocks. Whether you're building with wooden blocks or Lego, or you're building with shapes you can draw with a pencil. With the older kids, I think they want more step-by-step instruction. They go into more of a, I mean, at the young levels, it's a theory of education called constructivism, where they're supposed to be discovering things for themselves. As they get older, they need more of an apprentice model, where they're being guided more step-by-step and shown this is one way that you can be successful doing this. And having technology in the classroom makes a big difference with that, because I can show them, but if everyone in the class is trying to draw different things, that gets overwhelming very quickly. But being able to hand them an iPad and say, you know, find other artists who have chosen this topic and look at their work. Looking at a photograph of a dog versus looking at a painting of a dog, where an artist has made some of those judgments about what lines to emphasize, what light, what color, you know, where to place shadows and things like that. Finding a style that you like and is interesting to you all make a big difference to being able to understand the steps, and it supports that kid. As opposed to looking at a photograph, photographs can actually be really challenging references to work from, because maybe the light is flat, or maybe the pose is strange, and because we assume photographs are real and true, we give it the benefit of the doubt, but when you draw it, it looks like your dog has something wrong with it, because it's in a funny pose. You know, so there's a lot that goes into it.
That's so funny, because when you talk about that, I guess I am in this mindset of, if you're going to be creative, it has to be kind of like new, out of nowhere. You have to, you know, let there be light, and it's
right.
there.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
But
I mean, it can.
Because to me, it's like, well, that's cheating if you look up a picture of a dog, but that's not cheating. That's part of the artistic process.
No, I mean, because most of us don't have photographic memories, so you rely on other things to support you. I mean, you go back to the Renaissance, and we tend to think of people like, you know, Leonardo da Vinci was, you know, this genius, and he was brilliant, but he would have just come up with it all out of his head, but he was fascinated by science, and he made use of the different types of projectors they were inventing at the time to develop the compositions for his paintings. It doesn't take away from his skill, but he was very interested in technology. I've yet to figure out how you can cheat at making art. I mean, you can counterfeit art and take credit for something that's not yours, but as far as learning to make something, that's not really cheating. I mean, it's kind of like we talked about the quilt show. I mean, vast majority of quilters use a pattern, right? They follow someone else's design, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You know, and if you go back to traditional art instruction, even back in the 1800s, you learn to paint and you learn to draw. You started out by copying other people's work. They had prints that you followed, and then you went from prints to drawing sculptures, and from sculptures you drew the figure. But you didn't start out with a live model. That's too hard. You look at how other artists do it, and then you start to assemble that. Just like as a musician, you would learn notes and scales. They don't expect you to invent your own scale.
That's great. I'm a quilter too, and I only use patterns, and I think I've always felt like it's not that creative. I'm just copying what someone else did. But thank you. You're making me feel like, oh, I am doing something there.
I mean, it's part of the reason that I got out of college and I had an opportunity to learn to weave. I was working at a small museum in Eastern Washington, and that was really appealing to me because I could make something practical that, you know, it's creative, it's beautiful, but then someone's going to take it, and rather than, you know, the goal of hundreds or tens of people are going to come look at it in a gallery and admire it. It's like one person's going to take it and wrap it around them and have a very different aesthetic experience. They're going to enjoy that, and it's, you know, it's warm and cozy. That's kind of a nice thing, as opposed to going and seeing a painting in a museum. I mean, that's great too, but there's lots of different, you know, it's kind of like the difference between a home-cooked meal and going to a really fancy restaurant or having some takeout, you know. They're all good things, but that home-cooked meal means a lot.
So that's like, how do we value what you make, right? And you said a really common reaction was, oh, you could sell that. So I think we have this desire to, we can value it if it's useful or if it has a dollar amount on it, but you sound like you have a different value system, that if you enjoy it or if it...
Yeah, well, I mean, think about when you were a little kid and you learned to do something all by yourself, right? That feels really good, you know, and I think adults still like that too. I made this myself. We're just more self-conscious about sharing it with others, and when you do finally get something that you want to share with others, or some things just out of habit, you know, I mean, I love to cook for people. That's my favorite way of showing people I care about them. So that's, whether it's a recipe or something you've made up yourself, but that kind of thing just makes your daily life more enjoyable. I think quality of life is a big part of creativity.
Yeah. So we started our worship time with that quote from Mr. Rogers, which I can't remember word for word, but it was the idea that everything you make comes out of who you are. And we've talked about Genesis, that you know, it sounds like it's just coming out of nowhere. There you are. Who you are inside is what helps you make and do everything in life. And I've been thinking about that this week, because it does sound like God just created everything out of nothing, because that's how it says in the beginning when there was a formless void. But God still was. I mean, there was a formless void, but there was also God. And so everything is reflecting who God is inside. And even when God creates humankind, God creates them in the divine image, that we are supposed to somehow reflect what God is. We also talk a lot about being co-creators with God, that we're here to not just receive. You said this really well, to not just consume, but to create, that we're here to do stuff, make stuff. And that's the rest of Genesis. You know, God talks about giving people the earth so that they can work with it and like co-create with God. You talk about if you're going to be an artist, you have to be very aware of what's around you and pay attention to what things look like. You talk about perspective, and so it sounds to me like if you are an artist or you're going to be a creative person, you've got to be really paying attention to what's outside, but also like what's inside, what's in you and what you care about. And you know, when you were talking about perspective, like looking at this building, that teaching drawing or learning to draw teaches you a lot about perspective and perception. It almost was like I couldn't tell if you were speaking literally or figuratively about life. So all this is a long build-up, but
that's above my pay grade.
but I don't think so. I don't think so. See, so the people, when I tell people I'm a pastor, they get intimidated too. And 90% of the time they apologize for having used a swear word in the immediately preceding conversation. But, you know, I think whereas you probably think people are more creative than they give themselves credit for, I think people are more perceptive about life and spirituality than they give themselves credit for. So all that big buildup, what have you learned about, what does art teach you about like the kind of person you want to be, or the life you live? Or
it gives you tools to build the life that you want to live, at least at the level of material culture. I think it makes you pay a lot of attention to material culture, and also how you bring people into your life, and you know how you serve those people. You know, I think I do a lot of fine arts, but I do a lot of design, what would be qualified as design or craft as well. And I mean, I think that the quality of the items that you work with, I mean, I just think that our daily moral life is very much tied up in how we live. You know, we tend to think about the big moral pictures and the terrible things that happen around us, but there's also the small things in our day-to-day life that are really important, that deserve to be paid attention to, from the clothes we wear to the food that we eat to where we choose to live and who we spend our time with. I think are all really important aspects of those moral choices. The community piece especially, how you honor the people around you, I think is really important too. And I don't know, that's a big question.
It's a big question, but I think you're right, that it's really the little things. We think that in this big thing, like, I got to create something out of nothing. I have to be LeBron James or have this masterpiece, but it is the small things, how you care for the people around you, and that making a home-cooked meal can be the answer to a lot of different questions.
Well, and understanding what you can and can't control. I think there's a tendency, when we see the big things that we can't control and that we can't change, that it helps to be able to come back to those smaller things that feel more like devotions to the people around you within your reach, that you can influence.
Yeah. I think Mr. Rogers really cared about the small things. And someone in the congregation pointed out to me a week or two ago that when he was talking to the camera or to the viewer, he never said, "Hey kids," or he was always talking to one person. This is my television neighbor. So he was caring about one person. And if you were listening, you felt like he was talking to you. He wasn't talking to a whole mass of people and trying to be famous. He was just caring about one person. And of course, millions of people responded to that. And that's really a thing with Jesus too. I mean, he talks a lot about small things, to be the pastor and talk about Jesus for a second. He talks about the mustard seed, that we think we've got to have faith for all the answers. He says, you really only need faith the size of a mustard seed, which is one of the smallest seeds there is. Or all those parables about things getting lost, and the woman looks for the one thing. The shepherd looks for one sheep, or the woman looks for one coin. So there's something to that we think we've got to figure out this big moral universe and be the right kind of person, but it's really about the next way you can serve the people around you. Well, I do not have a clock. I have no idea how long we've been talking.
Okay.
But I have one more question for you. And if anyone else has a question, you could maybe ask him afterward. But I guess we have a lot of concern for the kids in our neighborhood. And we have a few here that we get to love and take care of and nurture. But I know we're very conscious of the wider community full of kids. And we remember it's hard to be a kid. And we see from news and things it's hard to be a kid. And you're there working with them every day, which we really appreciate. So I guess my last question is, what's your hope for the kids that you teach?
Coming from my class and my little world that I can control, I hope that they learn the value of their own ideas, that, there's something to being able to think for yourself. You don't have to just go along with what someone else shows you or tells you, that you can generate your own solution to a problem, your own idea for a work of art, or whether it's a project, any kind of activity that you want to do, that you don't have to just go and order it off of Amazon or buy it at Target. You can come up with your own idea, your own solution, and decide what kind of life you would like to live. So that idea of being a producer, a productive person, a member of your community rather than just a consumer, choosing from what's presented to you. I think there's a lot of problems out there that are going to need imagination to surmount. So.
Yeah. Thank you for being here with us, and thank you for all the work you do with our kids.
Yeah, I appreciate having the opportunity to do it. It's fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.